And then today we have the pleasure of talking about lighting design and programming for live events, live music, concert touring, and the like. And that's an area that, of course, is of interest to a lot of people because probably none of you have a school where this particular style of lighting is taught. And I know that just as we talked about with television, there are fewer opportunities to learn about it as you go. Clearly, you guys several of you are sitting in a theater. We know that's your background. And so today we'll talk a little more about the skill set that you need, the opportunities that exist to work over on this other side that we all participate in and watch on videos and on TV. And now we'll get to learn a little bit more about it. So Jeff Ravitz was gracious enough to put together our team of presenters for today. And I think, first of all, we are going to record this event for the students who aren't watching. And we're also planning to play this back as an event for our ETC study hall program. So I think you can start the recording, David. Oh, got the recording going. Good. And then I'm going to hand it over for a moment to Jeff Ravitz, who's going to get started by introducing himself and then kind of segueing into the rest of our panel that we have today.
Hey, everyone. Great to see you. I'm really excited about this panel today because I've got such a diverse group of designers and programmers, and there's one yet to come. He's going to be a few minutes late, but you know, I'll just do like a half-second intro of all of them in no particular order, or maybe alphabetical. Mike Appel is a designer programmer who has worked in every genre and discipline in the business, in the lighting business at least. Plus, he plays a few instruments too. But he and I have worked together. I know him personally, and he's got a great story and a great perspective on the business. Along with that, we've got Rob Sinclair, who is a friend of mine and a really diverse and multidisciplined designer, mostly lighting, but also, you know, full production design, runs the gamut from live entertainment through to televised entertainment, and he's joining us from the UK today. Jackson Gallagher is with a design firm called Fragment 9. He's a business partner and design partner of Jeremy Lechterman. And he's, you know, he and his partner are probably the newest entrants into the business, but that doesn't mean that he's inexperienced or new. But you know, I've tried to select a range of panelists that have been around for a while and have seen the progression from pre-moving lights all the way through to the technology that we have today. And then we're also going to have another programmer, designer, Benny Kirkham, who's done a zillion concerts, you know, does brilliant work, very intuitive guy, and quite a wide range of projects that he's worked on. And then myself, you know, I've been around for several decades, having started with theater training, and my initial interest was in the theater. When I got into deciding what I wanted to do career-wise and with my life, there really weren't that many opportunities in lighting as there are today. It was theater, opera, dance, not even so much live events, and then there was television and film, which was not something that I felt like I had access to. It wasn't something that that interested me nearly as much as it does today. And when I got out of my theater training at Northwestern University, I took a left turn into the concert business, answering an ad for a local band that was embarking on a national tour behind a record on Columbia Records, and that put me in touch with a lot of people in the business that categorized me as a theatrical concert designer. I really, when I got into doing music, I wasn't entirely certain what there was about music that was going to differentiate it from theater design. So I just approached it with the same parameters and priorities that I would designing a play or a musical or an opera or dance. I tried to make the talent look good. I tried to keep an eye on the surroundings and then do something that emotionally felt right to go along with the music. And of course, at that time, there weren't a lot of other examples for me to study. So I made it up as I went along, and then began to have a number of colleagues in the business that were also doing really interesting things. I learned from them. I learned from things that I saw happening in other parts of the world, and ultimately, progressed to working for some large touring acts, doing a fairly diverse collection of artists. I think a lot of people know that I've worked for Bruce Springsteen for a number of decades, and that's been a joy. He's a perfect client for me because he embodies that theatrical, dramatic, and highly musical combination that really works for me. But somewhere along the line, I also got quite interested in television, and it was about the time that music videos became popular, and I was curious about what was going on and what was different about that, and what the mechanics were and what the art was. So I learned a lot about that, had a couple of good opportunities. I'm sort of condensing it down, and have sort of made my stock in trade in the last several years of working for any live entertainment that's being shot for broadcast, webcast, streaming, and so forth. And there's Benny. Hi, Benny. So that's we can talk about philosophy and so forth later, but that's essentially how I came to the business. And from the theater tech desk all the way through to operating my own console in the days when all concert designers operated their own console, to the point where it made a departure and the console operators and programmers were a specialty skill that I made a conscious decision to concentrate on designing so that I could sort of keep my eye on the stage and work with some incredibly talented programmers who could do that so much better than I could. Benny Kirkham just joined us, and so Benny, I'll let you just sort of settle in and listen for a second. We're just sort of introducing ourselves and doing that kind of capsule summary. So let me throw it to Mike Appel.
Everybody. So I started out in theater. I was totally hooked on theater by the time I was 15 years old. I played in an orchestra, and the orchestra rehearsed in a roadhouse. And before you know it, I got a job setting up the chairs and stands, and then I got a job unloading trucks for the national tours that were coming through. And I just loved everything about the physical work of hanging lights, cabling lights. I love the intricacy of the rail, and stagecraft. All that was just it was kind of like a drug. I wanted to be around the theater all the time. I just wanted to be in the theater. I wanted to be doing, being around it. So I was, all through high school, that was what I did. I spent as much time in the theater as I could. And by the time I grew up in Brooklyn, so I was in New York City. So by the time I was a senior in high school, I was working on off-Broadway shows. And I went to Brooklyn College. And when I was at Brooklyn College, I wound up meeting an advisor who sent me on to apply for Santa Fe Opera. and I went and was an apprentice at Santa Fe, and then went back. I met Craig Miller, which was an amazing thing. Unfortunately, he passed away. He got very ill the year after I met him, and I went back as on staff the following year at Santa Fe and spent a lot of time working in theater and opera and dance. I spent a lot of time doing that sort of work. I wound up at the Clark Studio at Lincoln Center Institute working with Beverly Emmons, which was an extension of my connections from Santa Fe. And through all that time, I was an electrician, and I was also running the board. We had the first Obsession console at Santa Fe when I was there, very early Obsession desk. And then coming out of that, I had met a few people in my time in Brooklyn who had gotten into the stagehands union and had gotten jobs on sitcoms and TV shows in Queens at Kaufman Astoria Studios. And at a random phone call one day, somebody, I got a call, hey, you want to come in and be on the crew for a few hours? We need somebody to fill in. I said, sure. I went in and through, I guess, showing up and doing a halfway decent job, I got a job offer to be in the prop department, which I had never done props. I'd always been interested in lighting, and wound up being, I said, it's TV. Let me try it and see what happens. Well, I did a season in props. The following season, I met the whole lighting crew. I wound up on the board, running a board for the Cosby sitcom when Cosby was on CBS after his main success with NBC. So I did multiple seasons in the electrics department there, running the board, and then that put me into TV. And I started doing a lot of freelance work in New York City, working on Food Network and a lot of different, one-off shows all over the city. And then 9/11 happened. With 9/11, all of our work dried up. Nobody wanted to be in an audience. Nobody wanted to fly to New York. You couldn't there was no shows. There was nothing happening. But in that time while I was freelancing, I was doing shows. This is when we had a moving light programmer and a conventional programmer were two different things. There were two different jobs. And I was on shows where we had moving light programmers and I was a conventional programmer. I was like, well, those guys I see where the world is going. And I went and flew myself to Austin, got trained on a whole hog at high-end systems. And then, came back to New York, started selling myself around as a moving light programmer. That didn't go very well initially. And, just trying as much as I could. But I met through the contacts I made and the different shows I was working on. Eventually, I was on a show that was running on an MA. A guy named Patrick Dearson, I don't know if you know of him and his work. He very successful designer, programmer. He doesn't program much anymore, but we were working together, and I wound up on a show with an MA, wound up playing on the MA for a while, and then a designer friend of mine was like, hey, I'm doing this show, an Alanis Morissette concert for television. Do you want to program it? It's going to be on the MA. I had never taken a class. I basically read the manual and hoped for the best. I had my friend Patrick on speed dial, and, it went well. That show went well, and then I got recommended to do the VMA pre-show, red carpet and pre-show, and that was my second TV show. And after that, I was basically programming moving lights, and it's been a wild ride since then. I do a lot of corporate, I do a lot of broadcasts, do a lot of award shows. I've done the VMA main show for many years, CMT Awards, Kids' Choice Awards, a lot of corporate for Microsoft and Apple, and a bunch of programming and a bunch of designing. So, that's kind of my story and how I got started and how I got into it and where I am.
All right. Fantastic. Very interesting. Hey, Rob, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. I have this sort of fairly well honed origin story because I'm asked about it a lot, and I'm not sure how much of this is true, but I kind of hope most of it is because it sounds fun. When I was about 10, I went to the theatre with my parents, and I saw on the wall there was a light, and I noticed that it was plugged in. So there was a plug in the wall, And my thought process sort of went along the lines of, well, why is it plugged in? Why would you want to unplug it? Why would you want to move it? Why would what is this thing? Is that, are the lights just not just there? And that changed my view of that show and of every other show that I went to with my parents while I was a kid. And I gained this great love for theatre, and I tried to find out as much as I could about lighting, which in pre-internet was difficult. And then when I left school, I made the first of many bad decisions and became a terrible mobile DJ for a couple of years, which thankfully didn't last very long. And I then went to what was then really the only school in London. It was this thing called the Theatre Electrics course at Westminster College that taught you how to be an electrician, but also had like one day a week where you'd learn about theatre. And you did placements, so you went and worked in places in the industry. And out of the back of that, not only did I know how to rewire my parents' house, I also got a job at Verilight, coiling cables. So this was round about when the VL5 came out, just the sort of start of the explosion of moving lights and them not being exclusive anymore. It was just at the end of the time when Verilight technicians used to get their own dressing room, which was extremely useful for napping. So I kind of just missed it. And then I went from sweeping the floor in the warehouse to coiling cables and unloading trucks to learning how to fix lights, learning how to program the console. I was sent down to a hotel in the middle of London that had a small Verilight installation, and I did weird award shows and weddings and bar mitzvahs, and I don't think we did any funerals, but sort of close to that, and learned how to program there. And from there, I went on the road as a technician, and then I started running other people's shows, and then I got a break and started designing my own shows, and my career sort of built from there. I now try not to tour anymore. I try not to program so much anymore. I do, as Jeff said, I do a lot of production design. I do a lot of trying to coordinate lighting, video, lasers, and the whole thing into one. Try and coordinate all of the departments of a show into one whole, to one statement. That's kind of where I left off when the world ended. Since then, in the last 6 months, we've been doing a lot of TV work, been doing, trying to pick ourselves up as best we can. And that's where I am now, in my kitchen in London, with it raining sort of gently outside. So, the world keeps moving, doesn't it?
Cool. Excellent. Jackson, why don't you tell us about yourself and your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as with everyone in kind of the common thread, it all started somewhere in theater when we were all very young. I think I was probably maybe like 3 years old, and my mom took me to see probably a terrible community theater production of Pinocchio, and just like I was totally in awe and made her take me back like 4 more times. And bless her heart for going and seeing that show so many times. But that sparked an early love for theater, and I kind of circled through every corner of theater. I did ballet when I was 5, and then I did a bunch of acting classes, and then my grandma got me a little karaoke cassette deck machine that was just basically a microphone and a speaker. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And then I think by my 7th birthday, I got a little 4-channel soundboard, and then was obsessed with audio, and then tripped into lighting and did lighting for a long time, and I kind of just grabbed all the theatrical opportunities I could find in suburban southwestern Ohio, which wasn't a lot. And then realized that I could maybe try to make a career out of it, and went to school for lighting, and kind of through the middle, kind of turned my direction more towards video. And I was hopping on a mega bus to New York from Pittsburgh every opportunity I could get to just snatch anything I could do. And then I left Pittsburgh, moved to New York, was expecting to do a lot of theater, but was doing a lot of work as video programming and video directing, and just kind of taking anything that came to me. And I never expected concerts would be much of any part of my career. And then I kind of tripped into concerts and worked on Shania Twain for about 4 or 5 years, and actually crossed paths with Rob there towards the end. That's where I met him. Did that for a while, did some shows with my now business partner, Jeremy Lechterman. And so we did a bunch of stuff together. And then all of a sudden I looked behind me, and concerts were 95% of what I was doing, totally on accident, never tried to do that. And yeah, so that's where we've been designing, programming, everything, big shows, small shows, ever since until the pandemic. And since the pandemic, we've done a bunch of streaming stuff. We were just in the NBA bubble in Orlando for 3.5 months. I got back about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So it's very nice to be out of bubble prison. And here we are, just seeing what comes next.
What are we doing for the NBA?
We're doing all their video screens, so their virtual fans and all the offense, defense prompts and player reactions. And we had about 22,000 different video files that we were dealing with across the 22 teams they had down there. So it was a pretty insane technical undertaking.
Wow. All right. So, and just to complete the overviews and introductions, Benny, could you tell us about yourself and how you got to where you are?
Oh, very well. Hey, everybody. I apologize. I was late. I just put it into the iCal wrong. Just like everybody else, it all started really young. I was one of those kids who always wanted to pull back the curtain and find out what happened behind the machine, what makes this work. And I really enjoyed live performance. And I started to think about how all of the pieces would come together in a live performance and make something greater than the sum of its parts. And I gravitated towards lighting going into college because that seemed to be this really visceral medium that could evoke a lot of emotions and make you feel a certain way and tell that story in a really effective way. And to that end, me and a bunch of buddies all worked at the local amusement park and dreamed of working for this hometown company called Verilight. I grew up in Dallas. You can probably tell by my silly accent. And we would sneak in on fake IDs to where Verilight had an install in a little club called Mistral downtown. And we would sneak in there and just like it's kind of embarrassing to say, but we wouldn't sneak in there to drink. We wouldn't sneak in there to dance. We sneaked in there to watch the guys run the lights. And we all thought that was pretty cool. And from that time, I looked at the person who was actually making those amazing things happen that would take your breath away. And I said, I want to be that guy. And so years later, several of us actually ended up working at Verilight, some of us by the skin of our teeth. It was very difficult to get into the company at that time because they weren't hiring a lot of people. But we managed to get in, and one of us would get in and recommend the next guy. And we all kind of pulled ourselves up the ladder that way, pulled each other up the ladder. And ended up doing some amazing shows working for VL back in the 90s. I think I may have come in a year or so before Rob there because I came in just before the VL5. It was just the 2s and the 4s at the time. The 3 had been relegated to the shelf of bad ideas, and the 1 was still kicking around here and there, but it wasn't in huge use. And I did a lot of tours with all of your parents' favorite bands, Michael Jackson and Pink Floyd and Aerosmith and Def Leppard, just, all the bands that were of an era. And it was an amazing culture. And I learned all the valuable lessons that you need to know in life touring on the road. And then at the end of that, when I broke off from the company, they were making some changes in the company. I became independent, and I've been that way for the last 21 years. Running a little company that just has me as the one employee called Overnight Production. And that way I've managed to do a lot of lighting direction work and some lighting design work and a whole lot of programming because, I still kind of enjoy being that guy who creates the look and pushes the button to make it happen. Over the course of a bunch of years, I've run so many different kinds of boards. From kind of the early days working on a Kliegel Performer 1 that backed up to an actual cassette tape to the board I got after that was my first ETC board, the old ETC Idea. And to me, just the syntax on that board was such a breath of fresh air after the Kliegel that I thought, oh, I've found the source of it. I'm never going to need another lighting board after this ETC Idea here. That was a wonderful board. I went through the Strand boards and of course the old Leprechaun LP1000, the Avos, the Selco Gold, all of those boards. And they all have a little bit different approach, but over the years, and I'm not real bright, so it took me about 15 years, 20 years of programming boards before I realized that there's a zen to be found here, and that at a certain level, programming is just programming. And you can find, despite the syntax and despite the conceptual differences of different kind of boards, you can kind of find a common thread of how to proceed. And so taking on new boards is not the traumatic experience that it used to be for me. I got sitting here in the office next to me, I've got an MA3, and I'm learning the MA3 software as I go, and it's not as painful as learning the 2 was, or particular switching from a Virtuoso over to a Hog or an MA. Switching into tracking boards was a real traumatic thing. But we all get through it, and eventually you kind of realize that programming's programming, and you can think past the button hits to what's going on stage. That's kind of the evolution of my thought process through the years. And gosh, everybody's doing an awful lot more gigs than I am during the shutdown here. I've managed to pull a few, but I haven't fully turned the corner into television, video, anything like that. Just trying to keep the wheels on the track, and that's my story.
Well, pretty cool. Everybody's story and background, and I mean, Benny, thinking about what you were saying, that there's a commonality because you know what you want to, what the final result is, and so much of programming, especially these days, is organizing and thinking 20 steps ahead. That when you know what it is you want to accomplish, and that that takes time and experience to know that. It's just a question of the methodology at that point. I'm sure, not being a programmer, but having observed many programmers over the years.
And every programmer's got their own methodology is the thing. I wouldn't approach a show probably the same way that Rob would, or the same way that Mike would, but we would all get it done in our own way. It's just that you work within a methodology that makes you comfortable and works with the gear.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm just going to throw it out to get a little more conversational, and the students can also jump in and ask some questions. But one of the things that I know from having designed and sort of directed the programming of many concerts is that it evolved so thoroughly from the early days of the designer feeling compelled to spell out every breaking down every aspect of the programming. I'm told that I was the third or fourth client of Varilight for a Styx tour that we did in the early 80s, and so there wasn't a lot to really copy from. We had seen the big Genesis shows, but I was doing a tiny show, and their show was lots of lights all kind of, flying in, flying out. And we only had a few lights that we had dotted through an otherwise conventional system. And programmer came in. We were required to have a programmer. It had been a while since my theater days of even working with a programmer, because I had programmed my own conventional consoles in the concert world up to that point. You know what it's like when you're programming for your own show. There's a direct line from your brain to your fingers, and you just sort of make it happen. And now I was explaining everything, but also in 3 dimensions. I was calling out a light, all the different functions of a light. I would call out a light or a group of lights: color, pan, tilt, gobo, intensity, move on to the next light. And it was an arduous process, but it was really the only way we knew how to do it. And the programmer was sitting there waiting for me to tell him what to do next. Fast forward, many years, where we have a much different way of communicating with programmers, and programmers become co-designers of the show because you are in a position to, at least for me, I'm in a position to, kind of explain what I'd like the final result to be, and maybe a couple of inspirational lines, and then work with the programmer to achieve that. And maybe I don't even know what the final result is going to look like because it is a collaborative thing. So I'll throw that out. I'll stop blah, blah, blah. But I'm curious, between the designers and the programmers, what it's like and how it's evolved over the years when you, as a designer, organize yourself and work hand in hand with the programmer to achieve that final result, which is so different from working in the theater where you've got scenes, you've got a script. So many concerts don't have that. They have lyrics, but it's amorphous. Nobody really has any expectation for what something is going to look like. You don't necessarily have the sunset scene or the rain scene or anything that dictates precisely what you need to do. It's all down to emotion and rhythm and tempo. So having said that, jump in, everyone. I'm curious what your methods are.
Rob, get us started.
Sure. It's interesting having Jackson here, who's programmed with me, so he's been part of it. I think I'm an absolute nightmare. I work best when I'm with a programmer who I know and who understands me and who I have a common ground with. And with Jackson, we were working with Ali Pike, who's an absolute lifesaver, and I was working with her a couple of weeks ago. It's a case now of having a common language and a common reference to be able to talk about things, and I like to talk about things in quite an abstract way rather than number 32 in blue. It's more about how we want that moment to feel. And I also tend to work better if someone makes me an offer with something that I can then pick apart, which is quite soul destroying for the programmer. I used to, when I used to program my own shows, I went through a phase of being extremely controlling and of insisting that I did absolutely everything myself. So I did one tour where I programmed the lights, programmed the video, ran them both, called the spots, and I think I called cameras as well. So I was like directing the iMac while lighting the show, while calling spots, which I can't imagine doing anymore. And as time's gone by and I've let go a bit more, I've started to realize that actually working with a group of people, you get a better result than you do from that process of pouring it out of your brain and into the console, because you're examining all the decisions that you're making and you're getting other perspectives on those things. So you get a far better result from working with other people and from allowing the programmers to have an amount of them within the show. I think is very important for music things, certainly, and I can't imagine doing it any other way. Is that in any way helpful?
I think so. Jackson, is he telling the truth? Is he a nightmare to work with as a programmer?
I plead the fifth. No, I mean, we only worked together. We really only had about 2 weeks together on that Stagecoach experience, and I was doing more of the video directing and only a tiny bit of the programming. So I don't think I'm in the position to really speak with confidence from that. But I mean, I think it comes from kind of having specificity in what you're looking for and having that separation from the design side of things and the technical programmatic side of things. And I think you can find that separation and kind of that level of abstraction in several different ways. Like I spend a lot of time as a programmer. I spend a lot of time as a designer. I spend a lot of times programming something I am designing and looking at the way that me and Jeremy work. I kind of do about 80% of the video side of things, and he does 80% of the lighting side of things. And then we just kind of start poking each other. It's like, oh, hey, what if you added this to that effect that you're doing? Or what if that happened? And it's really easy when you're sitting in the programmer chair to be like, okay, I can I know that 20 minutes of effort gets me to 90% of something looking good, and it would take an extra 40 minutes to polish that to 100, and I'm just going to be lazy and I'm not going to do it because I'm almost there. And then having someone else being like, no, but like it really like should do that one thing. And it's like, I know you're right, and okay, now I'm going to do it. And having that abstraction is so key to getting that last piece of polish. And when Jeremy and I are working together, like I push him to do that extra little bit. He pushes me to do that extra little bit. If I'm programming for someone else, then it's a lot easier because they and I think the situation that Rob is in a lot of the times that he's speaking to is kind of focusing on that bigger artistic piece. And not that the programmer is in any way lacking in any sort of artistic view. I think that's insanely necessary as a programmer, but it's so easy to get bogged down on the technical side of things. And that split and that abstraction is so key to achieving that final level of polish and finding that wherever you can. And even if I'm programming something that I'm designing, being able to walk away and sleep on it and come back and first thing in the morning, play back everything I did yesterday with that fresh mind. However you can find that split is at least crucial for what I've seen and where I've seen success and stuff that could use a little bit more.
We're going to take a moment and let Hannah ask a question.
So I actually have two questions. The first one being, you guys appear to be all over the map with Rob in the UK and Jackson in Tennessee. Is there a place that you feel you need to be in order to do concerts, or do you just need to live near an airport? And the second question is, do all of you guys read music? Is that something that you feel is necessary in order to successfully program for concerts, or do you just need to have rhythm, basically?
Benny, get us started.
Oh, sure. As far as where you want to live, I know people who live in some of the most far-flung places you can possibly imagine. One very successful person lives in Bigby, Arizona, which I'm not sure I could find on a map, but I'm pretty sure there are very narrow roads that go there. But the second part is very interesting to me because I know one person in my entire 35 years of doing this who can actually read music, and he is a very good programmer. And I don't consider it necessary. It's just having the ears to hear it and being able to imagine what's possible visually with what you're hearing and what would just really get people off when you create that and make it happen on a big stage. Anybody else?
Well, I mean, certainly for me, growing up in New York and being around in New York City certainly kickstarted my career. I currently live in Florida, and I don't think I would have had the same opportunities if I was living here growing up. It was definitely I was very, very fortunate to be in New York City when I was, and being around the production that was happening there. So, but once I had some success, I was able to move out of the New York area, and then once I was being flown around to do shows all over the place, it didn't matter where I lived as long as I was near an airport. So
that's a really good point. When you're starting out, it makes a difference much more so than later on.
Yeah, I mean, you were in Dallas, so you had the
exactly
to be a satellite and be exposed to that world.
Well, a lot of times when you're first starting out, nobody's going to consider you valuable enough to want to fly you somewhere. And so, being available is a really good thing. Yeah, I hadn't considered that. That's a good point, Mike.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Once pretty quickly, you can live wherever you want. Plenty of shows will fly you wherever you need to. If you start on the touring side of things and you're actually on the road, a lot of tours base themselves out of Nashville. So there's probably a little bit more benefit being out of Nashville, but getting that foot in the door, and you can get that foot in the door pretty quickly and prove your worth and get people to fly you pretty quickly. But yeah, that first foot in the door is so key. And it's usually a lot to ask a production to fly someone in. I mean, concerts usually have tighter purse strings than TV shows and other corners of the entertainment industry. But if you're in town where we're rehearsing or where there's a show or whatever, I'll open the door to anyone that wants to come and be a fly on the wall, or if they have a little bit of money, do like a mini internship. I always want to try to pay people if we can. Like we've had people who have friends in St. Louis and have come out and like crashed on that couch, and we've brought them on the whole time, and like always love to try to do that. But I mean, that goes such a far way to getting started.
We got a question from Bill Rios.
Go ahead, Bill.
Hey all. First, I wanted to say thanks for talking so much about the relationship between designers and programmers. I think ever since the TV roundtable we had, when one of the speakers basically said, if you want to play with lights and make pretty looks, then be a programmer, don't be a designer. And so I think it's been really kind of stirring in terms of like, what is the designer role in all the different kind of disciplines we're looking at. And so I'm kind of curious, like where does where does the programmer and designer, like in terms of deciding what gear are going to get used on a, like if you're setting up a rig, like how much does the programmer have input in that in the beginning, or is the designer just hand the plot off, or does that just depend on the relationship?
It depends on the relationship, certainly. I mean, most of the time the show is designed from a couple of different, you get a design from a designer based on the show's requirements and based on budget, based on location, based on what gear you can get at the time, what's available. But, you know, the relationship beyond that, it's really one of, certainly in the shows that I work on, you work for a common goal, but in the end, the designer understands the need of the client and is in touch with the client, in touch with the producer, and you're getting direct feedback through them to edit the work that you're doing towards the common goal. So you're constantly putting ideas forward. Like when we get a rig online, we're constantly putting, you know, all right, certainly in the broadcast scenario, as soon as the rig comes online, we're building looks. We have building focuses, building palettes, constantly building and putting in the building blocks of a show. Now, you can spend hours working on that, and then the designer will come along and go, no, they don't want that. They want it to be X, Y, Z, or we want it to be this. And you say, okay, fine, no problem. I'll change it. And that relationship of designer to programmer, you know, you as a programmer, you need to be pretty egoless in that role. You have to be able to say, all right, well, yeah, I've worked on this for hours, but it's your show, and you have to, you can't be so invested in it that it becomes a problem for you to change the look. But I digressed a little bit. But basically the gear, for the most part, I don't know if anybody has other experiences, but the gear is really a function of budget, and show's requirements, and what you can get at the time. So, you can certainly use, as a programmer, you deal more with modes of the types of modes you're going to work the fixtures in, and what parameter counts you're going to give them based on what you need to get out of the light. So do you need 150 channels for a BI, or do you need 23 channel mode? What do you need? Like, what's the show? What does it require? And those are the kinds of conversations you have with the designer and with the crew that's putting the show together for you.
I would concur with that too. It's a long process to design. Sometimes it's a long process that's compressed into just a week or two. And so sometimes there's not enough time to really do kind of a community design or a co-design. The designer is there because they have some kind of a relationship with the artist or the management. It might be a business relationship, or it might be a relationship that's developed over years of common experience. And it needs to get off the launching pad at that point, and before it's shared with the rest of the team. And then everyone from the master electrician to the programmer is usually polled on some level for, this is what I want to accomplish. Can anybody see any holes in this methodology? And at least to the extent that maybe we can make some changes, you are dealing with the inventory of the vendor and your budget. But I always like to get some feedback from the rest of my team. But it's not expeditious to work as a 2 or a 3 person design team always. Just churning it out.
And I would add to that quickly, it also, I think, depends a lot on the designer and the programmer and what the programmer's strengths and weaknesses are and what the designer's strengths and weaknesses are. Like every designer approaches a show with kind of a slightly different footprint, and it's all about chemistry. Like Rob mentioned that he and Allie have been working together for a long time, and I imagine that they mesh really well together. And like you have some programmers that are a lot more hands-on at an associate designer level involved in those conversations early on. And a designer needs that input from the programmer. And then you have some designers that are much more hands-on and kind of need the programmer to come in later in the process. And it's about finding a relationship that kind of works for both people. And I've worked for some designers that I mesh really well with, and some programmers I've meshed really well with, and some that's like, cool, you're a great person, but like our styles are not quite the same.
Yeah, I would also add to that as well. That's absolutely the case. And I'll get a lot of requests, not necessarily to participate in early stages of design, that happens, but at later stages in the design, when you're trying to decide between two similar pieces of equipment, say you've got a set of key lights that the designer is unfamiliar with, and they have a choice between, company X's key light and company Y's key light, and they'll say, well, given the show as you understand it, which light do you think would be more appropriate for this? And well, maybe one of them's got a little bit more power. The other one's got a little bit better color space that we can work with. And so I'll get a lot of requests for input in that sort of stage as well.
Yeah, that happens a lot with us as well. I think I usually get the dull budgetary stuff out of the way. We have a vendor, and I'll have a conversation with the programmer, send them a plot, and it's usually the conversation revolves around, what are these lights doing? What do you want these for? Why have you put those in that place? And I can talk to the programmer about my expectations for what particular things we're doing, whether we've made the right choices, and then they can start thinking about how to lay the board out, how to group things in ways that make sense, what modes we might need, and all of the things that they'll need to be able to deliver whatever I want to do with whatever I've put in particular places. And then, of course, that's when the shorthand of working with people that you work with a lot comes in, because you can go, well, are these like we did on that show? And I can say, well, sort of, but I want to do something else with it. Or we've got a bunch of dancers, they're going to be living mainly here, so these lights are for them, these lights are for the principal. These things are doing this. This is a one-trick pony here that we're going to use to do this one effect. That sort of conversation. But it usually gets quite a long way down the line from the initial artist conversations to the production conversations to usually sending things out to bid before the programmer becomes involved.
Good responses. Miri, you have a question.
Yeah, so it's really more of a two-part question, and they're both sort of involving your knowledge in the industry when you're just starting out. Kenny was talking about like how it was kind of a monster to learn MA2, so MA3 is a lot easier. And like I'm in the process of learning MA2, and it is indeed a monster. But coming in, like starting out like that, how much of your job do you get to spend honing your skills? Like I imagine that getting hired on to a TV show, you'd have to come in with at least some knowledge. And if I walked up and said, I know a little bit of MA2, but not a lot, being a programmer doesn't give me the impression that there's a ton of time to teach me. It's a very like fast-paced thing. The lighting designer's busy, the director's busy, et cetera, et cetera. And so like, I guess how would you approach that if you want to learn so much, but you only know so much, and on the job doesn't seem like the most opportune time to learn, if that makes sense. I'm sorry if that was a bit scattered.
Mike Appel, what do you think?
Well, I think that, you certainly have to come into a situation on a broadcast TV show is probably not necessarily the best place to get your feet wet. It's brutal. It's cutthroat. It's hard. It's horrible, or it can be. It can be absolutely.
Wow, you're really selling it.
No, but I'm just saying that there's no time. Nobody wants to. It's one of those things where like getting your feet wet in programming, let's say with an MA or something like that. You definitely want to have a little bit more breathing space to where But the thing about it is, once you have the general skills to know how to get a light turned on, how to get palettes built, how to get cues written, and you are working to your skill level, the only way that you're ever going to get better than that is to have people pushing you. Because the only way that you get better as a programmer is to being asked to do things that are out of your comfort zone. So I'm always learning on the job. We just did a gigantic show in Shanghai last week. We had to do things. I mean, I've been programming automated lights for a very long time. And we did things on that show that I've never done before. We were dealing with AR integration, which is the new world now, dealing with, AR principles. We had dancers that were totally in a computer and not in real life. And, just dealing with different technical challenges, we're always learning, and you're always being asked to do things that are out of your comfort zone. And that's the way you really push yourself and the way you learn. So maybe, being involved in a fast-paced broadcast show isn't the best way to do that initially, but certainly as you get further along and more comfortable with the console and more comfortable with that platform, being in that environment wouldn't be so bad. It's just the initial startup of that, it can be very challenging.
So I have a question for you guys. As you think about your process for getting started in a particular production, and let's just say it's a band, live music, it's going to go on tour. When we think about the theater, we know certain things are going to happen. We're going to have a read through. The director's going to do a presentation. There's going to be scenic and lighting design presentations. What's the process for starting your design ideas when you're working with an artist, with a band, something like that? Where do you guys start from?
One thing that the concert world has turned into is that the lighting system is as much a part of the production design as anything else. Sometimes that can be limiting, but more than anything else, a lot of times there's pressure to design a rig unlike anything that's ever been seen before, because it becomes part of the signature of the tour. And so that can be, where you begin. And, it's art, it's geometry, it's budget, it's all of those things. Then once you've done that, you have to make sure that you've given yourself, the proper positions. Now, and mixed in here is conversations with the artist, them giving you their preferences, their vision for what the tour is like, listening to their music, or working for somebody like Bruce Springsteen, who just says, listen to all of my records and I'll be doing something from that catalog, and I don't want the lighting system to upstage me, to other artists that want a lighting system that looks like a spaceship or a lightning bolt or whatever. And sometimes those lighting systems can be very inefficient in terms of covering the things that you want to cover on stage. They become a look unto themselves.
The big difference in doing music stuff is that the producer, the director, the writer, the star are all on stage. They're all one person or one group of people, and they're standing on stage, and they're generally horrific, egotistical maniacs, and dealing with them is extremely difficult. So I consider that my job is to try and work out what their vision is and produce something that feels appropriate for them and their music. And it's actually been quite illuminating. I've done bits of theatre in the last couple of years, just how civilized it is compared to that absolute warfare that can be a rock star who's out of control. And so ideally the process starts with sitting down with the act, work out what they're trying to say, work out what the new record's about, work out how they want to present themselves. And then from there to build something that's appropriate for them and for their music and that sits within budget. And if that is that they want a cool looking spaceship, then great. Usually you go down a lot of paths of what they don't want of presenting things that they don't like, and it which can be quite soul destroying. And it's important to have a relationship from the beginning where I realize that I'm gonna, if I present them something that sucks, they're gonna really tell me. But also realize that it's okay for them to know that it's part of the process. And sometimes you come unstuck that they tell you they want a mouse and actually they want a water bottle, and there's no real way of knowing that. And you ask them, and they'd say, "What the fuck's that?" And exactly, like, so it's the politics of dealing with people that enjoy standing on stage in front of tens of thousands of other people, which I certainly don't. And trying to work out what they want is the start of it, and it's incredibly difficult and never gets easier. And what works for one guy does not work for the other.
Yeah, I think getting that trust early on and building that relationship. Like one thing that we'll do a lot is just kind of throw a lot of stuff at the wall that's not necessarily ideas, so they don't see it as part of their show. They're like, "Oh my God, I hate that." It'd just be like a bunch of pictures or a bunch of pieces of artwork, or totally different for every person, but just kind of get a sense of like ideally we want to see some things that you hate in this and some things that you love in this, and kind of start to get a sense of their style and what they're looking for specifically for that album cycle or that show. And then you at least have something to go off of, so you don't give them your first idea and they're like, "Oh my God, this is absolutely terrible," and everything that Rob is talking about. And figuring out what that relationship is going to be, because it is so different all of the time. And I think, yeah, Rob said it perfectly. I mean, one artist that we worked for, they would say that it's like 80% of the ideas that they have are brilliant, and it's our job to filter out the 20% that's not.
No pressure.
Yeah. and it's so different, and establishing that relationship early on is so key.
But it's like designing anything. There's still the who, what, when, where, why. Who's on stage? Where are they? Why are they there? What is their priority level in the overall picture? And you at least have something tangible to start with. And sometimes there's a production designer, sometimes there's not. Sometimes you're working, just kind of in a vacuum. And that can be difficult. And for artists that aren't able to really articulate what they want until they see it. And I had a Bruce Springsteen tour where we actually planned it out for 6 months. That's never done for Bruce. It's always a last minute throw together. We had 6 months. We had meetings in centralized locations in the country with the entire production staff. So, and we had drawings taped to the wall, and everybody was making their marks as to where things could be. So we would all cohabit. You've got the PA that wants to be in the same place as the lights, all of those things that need to be worked out. Where is the band on stage? Bruce still hasn't committed to it, but we think it's going to be exactly like last time. And so that's something that you can work with. Fast forward to, we never got any real feedback from Bruce. I'm driving to the airport the day before production rehearsals load, and I get a call from the tour manager saying Bruce has finally figured out what he wants the show to look like. And they are loading in the stage into the rehearsal studio. We get there, set it up. The band is rehearsing in a rehearsal studio someplace. We're setting up the gear somewhere else. Everything seems to be great. We think we know what we're doing. We get into the next venue that is our next to the last rehearsal venue. Bruce looks at it. He comes all the way back to where I'm standing. Then he goes to the back row of the highest balcony, and he looks at it and goes, no. Whole stage sawed apart, literally dismantled. Right goes to left goes to right, upstage goes to downstage. Everybody's moving around. Do it. Nope. Finish that. Let's do something else. And so that's what you deal with sometimes.
Yeah, Bill's quote from the television seminar was Bob Barnhart saying, if you really want to be a programmer, you really want to play with lights, be a programmer. Because he said, as a designer, I spend a lot of my time protecting my programmer and the team around them from the chaos that Jeff just described.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That is definitely, yep, that is very true.
The bigger the show, the more defense you're playing as a designer, and only the small shows do you really get to spend a lot of time doing the fun stuff and playing with lights.
It's very, very true that you really rely on your programmers to be able to get on with things while you're getting shouted at in the dressing room quite often. It's or management and telling you they don't trust someone, or there's all sorts of things that go on. I have a saying which I repeat to myself when I'm having my ideas dismantled and being consigned to another late night of rethinking them, is that there's only one artist and it's not me.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jake. You had a question.
That's an important mindset to have. It really is, because otherwise you could just you just kill yourself after a while. Because I mean, you really need to realize that you're in a we're artists, we're craftspeople, but we're in a service industry, and we're serving the show. What is the show? Whose show is it? We're serving the show. Now you want to bring what you think is best practices and the most artistic vision you can. But at some point, somebody thinks it's a better idea to do something else, and it's their show, we're going to do something else. Because otherwise, you're not going to be asked back. And in the end, you want to be part of it's always better to be part of the creative process than left on the sideline. So you fight the good fight when you think it's important and when you think it's going to benefit the show. But at some point, you have to know when enough's enough, and to, acquiesce to what the producer wants, or what the designer wants, what the artist wants, what the director wants. And, you have to just, play that support role of helping them achieve their vision.
And they have a track record for success, so you have to remember that. They usually know what they want. Yes.
Sometimes. When you're with Bruce, the answer is yes. He knows his audience. Sometimes you got the latest hip hop act, and I remember when we had Kanye for the first time. Nobody had ever seen Kanye before, and he came in and held up. We were doing hip hop honors in New York. Lou Horvitz is directing, who's directed countless Academy Awards and all this stuff. And Kanye held up our show. He absolutely held us up. Like, he wanted everything reversed, everything, and nobody knew who he was. Like, brand new. He was like the new guy. It didn't matter. He knew what he wanted, and he did it. And that was like, well, okay, I guess this is what we're doing now.
That's fine. Oh, and just by the way, that tour that we all got together in the same room in a centralized location and marked out where lighting and the PA was going to be. We get into rehearsals. It's 2 nights before opening, and the audio engineer decides he wants a whole array of cabinets right where my downstage truss is, and audio rules on that tour. So it all came apart.
Jake, you've had a question.
Yeah, so talking a little bit about kind of what Jeff just said, and adjacent to the ideas of communication and the aesthetics, I know a lot of you are kind of spread out, you do work internationally. Can you talk about any challenges that you kind of faced working internationally, and what those aesthetics change to be, and how things change if you're working from like an American theater and performance background to a European background?
Rob, why don't you start on that, can you?
I suppose I am international. It's been one of the great pleasures of my working life has been the amount of travel that I've managed to do, and I've done amazing things in wonderful places and met incredible people all around the world, from South Africa to Australia to all through South America, which is the most incredible place to work, to Japan. And I'm also fortunate that I spend about half of my working time in a normal year, whatever that is anymore, in Europe, and about half of my time in the US. And I feel really fortunate to be able to work on both sides of the Atlantic. Generally, things work pretty much the same. Lighting people are similar throughout the world, and it's really great to meet them. There are some cultural differences of what things are called, but you kind of get around that. There are, national cultural differences of particularly working in South America, of things maybe happening a little bit slower than you're used to, and trying not to get too frustrated. But I've not really come across anything that has stopped me achieving anything anywhere. And it's, as I say, it's been one of the great joys and opportunities of my life has been the amount of travel that I've done.
And then the other international guest, Benny from Texas, second country, basically.
Well, I'd go with exactly what Rob's saying. There's lighting people are pretty much the same everywhere, and there's nothing culturally overseas that's going to keep you from it. Just there's little things. In France, they don't say stage left and stage right. They say the garden and the heart, which I think is rather poetic. In Germany, they can't understand why we would use the actors left and right. They use house left and right for left and right, which can be pretty comical at times. Anybody else think of anything else like that that's a little odd culturally? There's some really unusual electrical setups at dimmers. It's best probably not to go visit the dimmer pit if you're overseas, because it can be a little scary. I'm sorry, I interrupted somebody. What was that?
Oh, I see a lot of similarity. I mean, we spent a lot of time over in England with Alt and Europe, and so I'd say probably half our work is over there and half of it's in the U.S. Very similar, very interchangeable. Lots of the little lingo and other things like that. I think if you start doing international festivals and getting into India or Africa, I mean, Australia, I'd say kind of falls into the American European world. We just spent a lot of time in South Korea working at BTS for 2 years. And I think we had a lot of culture shock there, and just the way that things are organized, the way that this, like what a stage manager means over there, to what it means in concerts, to what it means in theater, to what expectations of catering are. And I think especially culturally, like when it came to contract negotiations, like it was very easy to sell them on stuff. It was very hard to sell them on people, and they would not blink at a 6-figure production cost and then try to cut our per diem by $5 a day. And like, that's what they cared more about. And I think just lots of little nuances like that just will come up out of nowhere that you're not expecting, and will kind of just surprise you once you get outside of the American European world.
Yeah, India also used to be quite the adventure doing gigs over there.
Yeah.
And in terms of show aesthetics and cultural aesthetic, I mean, everything we do now is so global. Everybody, unless you're in a country like China that has a limited internet, and they don't see everything. But again, the work that's being done in the States on television here is being mimicked over there, and some of the work that's being done over there, because they have access to, tons and tons of gear, and the cost is a fraction of what we have over here, just in terms of the labor to set it up and the overall rental cost. A lot of what's happening over there is being mimicked over here on broadcast shows. So, from a artistic standpoint, there's a lot of complementary work happening all around the world. So you don't have a lot of. I mean, we went off to China. We did a New Year's Eve show for them for Hunan National Television, and that was a bit of a learning experience, just in terms of the way they put their shows together, and the fact that nobody ever, nobody except the Westerners left the venue. So the locals slept from when they arrived. The camera people, they slept in the venue. We basically rehearsed 24 hours straight. And when the camera operators were tired, they would go to sleep under the camera platform, and somebody else would take over their camera. It was pretty crazy. So it's those sort of working differences. But I mean, from a aesthetic standpoint, there wasn't very much different.
Yeah,
they want a big show with big looks, and they wanted a gigantic spectacular, and we'd be the same anywhere in the world.
Yeah, the world has gotten a lot smaller than it used to be, and there's so many more commonalities, just like you can find Starbucks any place. But I think the main thing is respect. Americans can have a tendency to think they know how to do it best, and that wherever they're going, those people need to be, U.S.-splained about how it's really done. And it's not that way anymore. And it really hasn't been that way for a long time. There are a lot of commonalities, even though there are cultural differences to maybe their approach.
Video has come up and been spoken quite a few times through here. Obviously, if you've been to concerts lately, video has taken on a major kind of lighting element. I mean, I saw a band in Austin where I kept thinking, are they going to turn on any front light at all? The whole thing seemed to be lit by a video wall. And Jackson, you mentioned, programming video. I mean, where did you get those skills? How did you develop those skills and move into that kind of a role?
I think parallel to my love for theater growing up, I also loved broadcast and spent a little bit of time at my local public TV station, and always loved cameras and making little films and stuff. So I had this love for theater and this love for video that were kind of separate. And then as video and projections were kind of starting to become the hot new thing on Broadway, even though they had been there for 20 years, going back into the early 90s, that was kind of the hot new thing. And I had coffee with a video projection designer working on Broadway very early on. And he's like, oh, there's more lighting designers than dogs in New York City. But if everyone wants projections, there's not a lot of people who do it. Now's a great time to get into it. And it kind of just became this aha moment of marrying these two things that I loved. And I think having the lighting background has been super valuable getting into video, but it's kind of a fun new frontier even today. There's so new and cutting edge, and we've kind of honed a lot of the lighting industry. It's not as exploratory as the video world seems to be, and that's what I love about it.
Very good. We got a couple more questions. Miri, and then Emma.
Me again. So just real quick back to working internationally, and something Jackson said about getting your foot in the door in a new city. I feel like a lot of people have talked about getting new jobs, getting your foot in the door, etc., comes from connections you make. And say you have no connections in Nashville or London or whatever, what would you recommend for moving there cold turkey and trying to get your foot in the door? Is it working clubs? Is it coiling cables? Is it just working your ass off? Because that's the impression I get. But any thoughts on that would be awesome.
I would say any and all of that. I'm a little biased to Nashville because I know the goings on here much better, especially when there wasn't a pandemic, and hopefully on the other side of this, when things are going crazy, there's going to be a lot of demand for gear and talented people. And it's very easy to get a job with a shop that'll put you out on tours. And if you're out on tours, especially if you're out on festivals, that's a fantastic way to meet a lot of people. At least via the Nashville route, I think having absolutely no connections, working for a vendor is a great way to meet a lot of people really fast. And you now know everyone that is on this call, so you don't have zero connections.
Yeah, that was my point. You really do know a few people at this point. And Nashville, Las Vegas, New York, we may not be able to vouch for you, having not worked for you. But if you said, who should I call if I want to get an entry-level shop gig? We can give you a number.
Of course. Thank you. I appreciate it.
But it's also reaching out to people whose work you admire too. That there's nothing wrong. I mean, that goes a long way. Talking to somebody or emailing somebody, whether through their website or something like that. People whose work you admire and who you'd like to be able to work with, maybe they would be interested in having you as an intern, or can point you in the right direction of something that would put you on a path to eventually working with them. It's that's definitely another route to go. Don't be shy is what I'd say. Really, tell somebody why you're interested in working with them. You've seen their work, you know what they're doing, you've been following their career or whatever it is, and you say, all right, well, I want to do the same kinds of things you're doing. How can that happen? And the advice you get will definitely help you achieve that.
And from my end, I always really enjoy it when people are enthusiastic. So I still absolutely adore what I do for a living. I love it. And if I meet someone who's just starting out and they're enthusiastic and they want to work and they want to learn and they want to do things, that counts for so much. I meet some people that just sort of feel like it's a difficult thing to say, but sort of it feel like they should immediately be doing great things or should immediately be programming or whatever. And in some cases that's true, but generally you need to be really keen to get on. Unfortunately, I don't know whether it's right or wrong. The fact that you tend to start at the bottom and you tend to have to work really hard. It worked for me, but it was tough.
But again, I mean, when I was starting out, I really thought I was going to be involved in theater totally. I mean, this world that I'm in now with, events and broadcast, that I didn't even know that existed. It was one of these things that was just so foreign to me. I reached out to Jim Ingalls, who, is a great dance lighting designer, and he didn't know me from a hole in the wall. And he invited me over, and I had like a high school portfolio of, materials. And he was like, "Oh, bring everything you have." And I was so excited about it. And he was so excited just to talk to me and just to be like, guide me. And he invited me to his apartment, cooked me dinner, and we spent the whole night talking about theater. And it was just a wonderful experience. And it was all just from, me cold, basically reaching out. I got his phone number from a mutual acquaintance. And, it was like, from a stagehand at BAM, because he did the Hard Nut with Mark Morris at Brooklyn Academy of Music. And I was like, "Oh, do you have Jim's number?" And yeah, he's like, "Sure." And I called him up, and it's like, but just those, now Jim, he didn't put me in touch with somebody that got me a job, but the guidance that he gave me and the advice that he gave me going into college before I went to university and before I went to, off to work at Santa Fe and things like that, it was just really invaluable.
Emma, you had a question.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I have a question about programs that you use besides like Vectorworks, AutoCAD, Lightright. What do you find yourselves using the most? And if there's anything else that you use, what do you recommend for us to start learning while we have kind of this weird time and COVID and things? So either programs or other just programming things. What do you recommend that we kind of look at?
Good question. What are you guys into?
I use Adobe Audition an awful lot. I have so many shows that I end up turning over to other people that they tend to be really complicated shows on time code. So learning that program is very valuable. The whole Adobe suite's pretty valuable.
What do you use Audition for, Benny? What do you do with it?
Oh, I use it for, that first stage of when you're hearing new music and you're trying to map it out. You can bookmark spaces where you want to put cues. And then you have time-coded bookmarks at that point that you can then export and put into your console, create blank cues that run, according to how you intend a number, like on a theater show or a song to run, including any accents you want to include. And that takes the boring part out of programming, the labeling and the figuring out how many verses there are. From that point on, it's like a lighting Mad Lib. You fill in the cues with how you want them to look, and it's a really streamlined process. If you get all the cueing and labeling and timing stuff kind of out of the way at first, it takes you a long way towards being able to realize a completed project, and also to it takes the whole I got to train myself how to run this thing. It takes that out of the mix entirely because you'll need to get it right that one time.
Getting ahead of data entry and programming is a major deal, and it's a major time, just in terms of a time saver and allowing you to spend your time being more creative as opposed to putting, having to run the song 100 times and try and learn it, live.
Exactly.
You're much better off doing what Benny's talking about, either using Audition or Reaper or programs like that.
A lot of people like Reaper. I already have Adobe for Photoshop and Illustrator and some of these other things that I use, like in a design process. So why wouldn't you? You also get After Effects, so you can start learning some of the video content creation. A lot of that's built in After Effects, particularly for things like corporates, that sort of thing. Some stuff for concerts. I don't know if it still is, but it's just a really powerful little suite of programs to have. And if you're a student, I think you get it dirt cheap. There's no reason not to learn that stuff.
Yeah. Because a lot of people also use Logic. We use Reaper because you can run the evaluation edition indefinitely, because almost everyone has Adobe, but that's the only thing. But any digital audio workstation, it's the same idea and everything that you said, Benny. I think it's so important. Like, you can't just be opening up a MP3 and VLC every time you want to test a track.
Yeah, I pick up on what Mike's saying about getting ahead of the data entry. I got to recall again, Bob Barnhart spoke to this in the television when he said, get really good at your drafting, so that when you're drafting, you're not thinking about the process of using your CAD program. You're thinking about the design, so that the CAD process is coming automatically. And I think it's what Mike's saying about data entry into the console. Same kind of thing applies.
Well, yeah, definitely. Part of programming, and anybody that's programmed for a long time, certainly with larger rigs, automated lights, and things like that, you have a muscle memory, and it's the same with drafting. You have a muscle memory of the program that you're using and how to get from point A to point B, and the quicker the more consistency you have with your setup, the faster you'll be as a draftsperson, the faster you'll be as a programmer. So even though we all do shows that are vastly different and the overall look is vastly different every single time, the building blocks of your show file are going to be the same. So you know how it's built, and you know how to find everything to edit and to fix and to refine. So, a show that we're doing for, a big corporate show, or certainly you're going to have different things for concerts or one-offs. You have different parameters. But for the most part, the underlying building blocks of how you have your show file set up wants to be relatively similar all the time, so that you're not figuring it out for the first time every time you sit down at the desk. There needs to be a major shorthand there that just allows you to work freely, and so you're not having to think about how you're getting from point A to point B. It just happens.
So we've got about 5 or so minutes left in our allotted time, and I thought it might be fun to we get to ask you guys a lot of questions. I thought it might be fun to turn the tables a little bit. Do any of you have questions for any of the students? And I'll start by saying an example. Miri, tell us about what you want to be doing in a few years.
Sure. I want to learn as much as humanly possible about programming, so I can be a programmer for a band on the road. I want to travel, listen to music, learn as absolute much as I can. I'd love to also get into the London theater scene at some point, and sort of split my time between the US and the UK and be a programmer that people really enjoy working with, who knows consoles like MA and ETC, but also like Ava Lights and anything else that is like that. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Hannah, tell us what you think you want to be doing over the next few years.
I'd like to get into live television and live events in general. I really like the big shows, the big award shows, and that sort of thing. So that's the kind of world that I have a little bit of experience in already, and I'd like to keep on that path.
Very cool. Jake, what about you?
I really like to get into especially architecture and like industrial work. So kind of that range. But really, at this point, now that we've been going through all these talks, I'm so willing to jump into any part of the industry now. So.
Very cool. Emma.
Currently, I do, I guess, live events on campus, and I go to University of Wisconsin Eau Claire. So kind of small things we do on campus. So I want to either continue my work within live events and programming and kind of build up my skills there, but I'm also leaning towards opera and figuring out what's in the opera realm. So I'm on opposite ends of the spectrum, but yeah, still deciding.
Very good. I don't know, Broderick, is your mic working? I think Broderick was having trouble.
Hello.
Yeah, it's working, Mike. It's going ahead.
Oh.
Go ahead.
So man, this is great. Wow, it's been working all this time. Well, since I'm talking, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you. I was super excited for this panel, super inspiring. I do have a question, and then I can definitely tell you what I want to do. I know we're running out of time. I've been in graduate school. I was a programmer on cruise ships. I had the opportunity to work at like LD Systems in Houston, and I had the opportunity to program. I haven't programmed in almost 2 years. Obviously, like those skill sets has deteriorated, but I also want to continue to program and design and things of that nature. What is the process of getting that skill set back, and what I need to do in terms of to make that happen? And also, I'm interested in live entertainment. I love lights. I just want to do something in terms of live entertainment, whether it's concerts, plays, Broadway shows, conferences. I want to just do something that's immersive and as well as a conversation piece. So yeah.
So getting your chops back with programming, Benny, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I see you called on me because I'm the other Texan, and he's calling. Are you still in Houston, Broderick?
No, I'm actually at Savannah College of Art and Design. I'm in Savannah, Georgia.
Fair enough. And you want to like get your programming skills back. You feel like since you did some of that cruise ship programming, you might have lost a step on that stuff.
Oh, it's gone. Oh yes, it's gone. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. It is gone. So yeah.
If you want to get some of those chops back, I think you'd find it coming back to you. If you've already done it, you'd find it coming back to you a lot more easily than you may think. There are some really good online resources. Our friend Kat West runs consoletrainer.com on YouTube, and she has got a really good and intuitive manner in how she does training, and so she's a wonderful resource. She primarily an MA trainer, but that MA is probably the leading console in the United States, so that's not a bad place to start. Okay. And you can also check out Martin Lighting does a web learning series, and some of those are on various subjects, but there's certainly a few on programming. I've done a couple of them, and I know that ETC has got webinars like this, and they do some pretty amazing training stuff as well. So you could get on that. And gosh, it is a bit like riding a bike. I've spent the last 7 months, after years of not really getting any time off at all, I've spent the last 7 months not really doing all that many shows. I just did one last week, adapting a show to a different venue for the purposes of social distancing. And within about a half an hour, it came back to me, and I was moving at the same speed I had been moving 7 months ago. So you don't lose those skills. Once you train your mind to work in that way, you're there. I don't think you should worry about it. But yeah, check out those resources. See if it helps you.
And also too, I've also just being educated and just listening. I'm so sorry, guys. I really thought my microphone's dead. I had one more question.
Nope.
So also too, like along with this process, How important is it? Obviously, I know a whole bunch of consoles. With me just getting back in, should I just find a specialty, like in terms of, okay, cool, this is my software, this is my console, and this is what I'm going to use? Should I focus on that, or should I also focus on other consoles and things of that nature?
What do you guys think, Mike or Jeff?
Well, I mean, it all depends on where you have the opportunity to work.
Okay.
If you are able to work for a shop that owns ETC desks, then you want to jump in on that. If you have the opportunity to work for a shop that's got an AVO console, do a deep dive on that. It's just a matter of the access you have. If you want to be working, you have to work with the equipment that's available. So, I'd say, at some point, finding a specialty with a desk will probably help you out. But initially, you're probably better off keeping your options open based on what's available to you. So if you have a venue that's running, an old hog, learn that. If you can get to a venue that maybe you'll come across an old AVO console, or who knows what desk you'll come across. But definitely leave yourself open to not specializing initially.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, when you get asked, when you get booked on larger shows, a lot of times you'll have a choice of what console you want to use, and then you'll go with whatever is the most comfortable for you. So, for me, I'm mostly on an MA desk 97% of the time, unless something really strange happens, and that's what I'm comfortable with, and that's my choice of desk to work with. So, because of the nature of the shows that we're doing.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yes.
Good. Glad we got you in, Roger. I'm glad it was working. Well, guys, we've kind of reached the time that we've set aside for today's event. So I want to really give a special thanks to our guests and to the students for attending. Thank you very much. You guys have another seminar this afternoon with Paula, which I know will be equally interesting. And then we move into the next phase of our program, which is giving the students a chance to show a little bit of their work and to have a chance to have smaller or conversations in a smaller setting. And we'll be starting that up in just the next couple of weeks. And Jeff, if we want to invite some of these guys into those sessions, we'll definitely be a contact for you there. So any closing thoughts, Jeff, or anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think I speak for everybody, but as for myself, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know some of you already have. If you ever do reach out to me and you don't get a timely response, reach out again. Sometimes you can catch me just at a point where I'm in the middle of a work tornado and things do slip. But I'm really anxious to share whatever I can and hear what you're up to and help problem solve. So. I'm always inspired by the students' energy and all of the things that you're interested in. And I guess the last thing is I think that all the disciplines, concert, theater, live events, I think they all feed one another. I've always found that I learn something when I learn something in a theater context, it helps my concert work. My concert work helps when I do theater work, and it all kind of combines into TV. So I'd say embrace working for several different disciplines in the business.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. This has been a valuable afternoon. It's really nice to hear all the different points of view, and I hope we get to talk to all of you guys again in the near future. Some of you guys have put your email in the chat. That's great. So students, if you want to check the chat, harvest some emails. I think they said don't be shy. That sounds like it's the key. We've heard that before. So thank you guys, and students, we'll see you guys this evening with Paula.